Life is about perception. And I'd like for you to take a moment and think about your perceptions of the children you work with, because your perception is probably wrong. Their reality is probably different than what you think. Share a quote with you real quick. Remember, everyone in the classroom has a story that leads to misbehavior or defiance. 9 times out of 10, that story behind the misbehavior won't make you angry. It'll break your heart. I'd like to share with you a story of trauma and healing, failure and success, of loneliness and connectedness. Actually, it's my story. I've only shared this with a few people, but I'd like to share this with you today. Part of the reason I'm willing to share this with you is I'm hoping to have a positive impact on your perception. Forgive me from reading from my notes. This is personal, and I will get off track if I don't. I was born in St. Louis, Missouri. My family lived in a home that was burned out in a basement. My father was a concrete finisher, a veteran of the Vietnam War. He had many substance abuse issues. My mother was a stay-at-home mother who also had substance abuse issues. When I was 4 years old, my father, who was dealing drugs, had a bad drug deal go down. And in that, my life and my mother's life were threatened. So my mother made a determination to leave Missouri. So she packed us up and we got on a Greyhound bus and we traveled to Arizona to be with her brother, my uncle. Was picked up at the bus station on my 5th birthday. Upon fall of that 1974, I was enrolled in school for the first time. Because of my age, they determined I needed to go to 1st grade. Mind you, I had never had a book read to me, nor did I even have a book. Education was not a priority in my family's life. I can remember sitting in class, and we were doing math, and I became very frustrated. I was done. I raised my hand, and I asked the teacher if I could use the restroom. She agreed. So I went and got my little bag, and I put all of my stuff in it, and I walked home. Upon entering and arriving at home, my mother did not agree. She called the school, and she asked me to walk back alone. Dealing with these things was difficult, but it made it more difficult because of the substance abuse that was going on in my home. My mother had a new boyfriend who had addictions, and his addictions became so severe that he became a dealer. This often happens with addiction. I witnessed everything from bongs to needles to snorting, all different types of drugs and alcohol going on. One summer, my family determined that they were going to have a family reunion, and we went to Canyon Lake, which isn't too far from here. Everybody brought enough alcohol to take care of the adults, but nothing was brought for the kids to drink. So my mother, when I was thirsty, gave me wine. That was the first time I had ever become intoxicated and violently ill. To avoid these things, I spent a lot of time outside. I would pretend that I was a world-famous herpetologist, and I would take a pillow sack and a half-gallon of water and a snake stick and a jug to put all the critters I could catch, and I'd be gone for hours. Sometimes I would be gone overnight. I don't think anyone really ever missed me because I was such an active child. I was kind of difficult to deal with. During that same summer, that determination was made that we needed to go back to Missouri. What I didn't know is that my mother's boyfriend had a drug load that he needed to pick up in Ohio. They didn't want me along, so they dropped me off in Missouri to one of my aunt's houses and said they'd be back in a week. They returned the following year. At the end of that year, my mother did pick me up. We flew back to Arizona. After staying with her for a couple weeks, it was determined that she couldn't take care of me, so I was passed around to relatives and family and friends, whoever would take me in. As you can imagine, my education was suffering pretty greatly. During my third grade year, I'd missed over 40 days of school. I was a very poor reader. I did not have the tolerance to be able to handle writing or math, and so they put me in remedial classes. Well, the remedial classes weren't enough to overcome the 40 days of absences, so they determined that they were going to retain me. My mother did not like this idea, so she sent me to live with my father in California. My father lived in a studio apartment above some shops and with his girlfriend. She was very jealous and did not like having me around. There were a number of occasions where she tried to hurt me. On one occasion, she tried to scald me with hot water. My father made a determination that we had to split ways, and so we got in a different apartment. Not much improved in California. California had overcrowding of schools. The remedial classes weren't much better than what I had had before. So my father made a determination to send me back to my mother. He didn't have transportation, so he arranged for me to catch a ride with a truck driver, and my mother picked me up at a truck stop here in Phoenix. Upon spending a couple weeks with her here in Arizona, she again dropped me off at my aunt's house in East Mesa. I attended Stevenson Elementary School in Mesa, and the teacher, this was 6th grade, considered me to be kind of a problem child. So she arranged to have a refrigerator box put in the back of the room and cut a hole so all I could see was the board. This was humiliating, but she didn't know what else to do with me. I was angry at myself for not being able to keep up with the things that my other peers were able to do. Not too long after this, junior high hit, and I found sports. Sports was my ticket out of the doom and the dysfunction. In order to participate in sports, though, I had to ride my bike to school, participate in before school studies, and then ride my bike home after sports because there was no one there to pick me up. At the beginning of my high school year, my mother came back into my picture. She wanted me to come up and live with her in the White Mountains of Show Low, Arizona. I did. We lived in a small one-bedroom shack that had only wood for heat. I slept on the couch, and during the winter, I would steal wood from neighbors in order to heat the home. On the weekends, it was very difficult to find enough to eat, so I would make peanut butter and jelly sandwiches from the cafeteria so that I would have something to eat to get me through until Monday when I'd go back to school. Whenever I could, I would find other people's homes to stay at in order to avoid the dysfunction in my home. Beginning in my sophomore year, there were costs associated with school, books and lab fees and things, and I did not have any money to do that. So my mother gave me a number of bags of pot to sell to individuals so that I could make enough money to pay the fees. I'm pretty sure my school officials knew about this because the pot came up missing, and there was no disciplinary action that was taken. One of my teachers, who was actually my home economics teacher, her husband was a DPS detective. And it wasn't too long after that I got a job as being a snitch. So I would go around to local gas stations and places and try to buy alcohol and drugs from individuals in order for him to make an arrest. This allowed me to have enough money to pay for the fees and things that I needed to continue in school. The community of teachers in Show High School rallied around me for whatever reason. They began to require that I attend certain classes. I can remember my reading teacher. I was in reading classes for 3 years. Usually you only have one semester. I can remember that these teachers would often give me money and things to hold me over through long holidays. There was a special person who was a coach. He was also the school psychologist. And he was the JV football coach, and he took me in, and he made sure that I kept on the straight and narrow, so to speak. During the November year of my sophomore year, my mother and her boyfriend got in a terrible fight. In this fight, there was much beating and bleeding and things like that going on, and I had determined that I was done. At that time, I was about 175 pounds. In sports, I was pretty strong, and I attacked him with rage. If it wasn't for the neighbors, I probably would have killed the man. The police came. He was arrested. My mother, naked, bleeding, I went to her. This is about 3 a.m. in the morning, and she calmly asked me that I needed to get my stuff and leave. I packed my stuff, and I became homeless. For the next couple of weeks, I slept in a car outside the back of my friend's house. It was very cold in November in Show, Arizona. I had nothing. I had no one. I even contemplated suicide. In January, my mother was able to help me get a job at a local bar that she worked at, cleaning the bar up after hours. So at 3 a.m., when the bar closed, I would go in, and I would clean the bathrooms and the floors and wash dishes until about 5:30, and then I would walk to school. I was able to rent a room from a friend, and I even eventually got a job at Safeway. Coach took me in for a while, and then at 17, I tricked my mother into being able to join the National Guard. She signed the papers for me to be able to go in the military. The summer before my senior year, I went off to basic training. I did well. Within the first couple weeks, I was slotted to be the platoon leader, being the youngest young man in my platoon. I even made 2 ranks. I was a PFC upon leaving basic training. The school psychologist then took me aside and tried to make sure that I was safe. I was living with a friend at the time, and my senior year he came to me and he said, "You can live with me, no cost," which was amazing. He was taking a huge risk, taking a young man in with young children in his home. He also helped me get glasses, took me to the dentist, and did many things that I had not had in a number of years. Through his help, I even got a $500 scholarship to be able to go to NAU, which I didn't think was even possible. As I look back on my childhood and my adolescence, I recognize very clearly that there were certain educators and adults that were willing to form relationships with me that were crucial in changing my life. They saved me. I don't know if they know that. I don't know that they knew that they gave me hope. They gave me love. They gave me connections. They went the extra mile. They could have written me off. They could have written me off as a bad kid, a lost cause. They could have suspended me. They could have expelled me. They could have thrown me out. They did not. It was this extra effort. It was this time. It was the human connection that changed the trajectory of my life. That's my story. It's heartbreaking, but it's one of hope. It's a story of trauma and triumph. It's a story that, like all individuals who work with kids, you can profoundly have an effect on where they end up. You can change their story. Remember, everyone in the classroom has a story that leads to misbehavior and defiance. 9 times out of 10, the story behind the misbehavior won't make you angry. It'll break your heart. Thank you.